What's the hardest test you've ever taken? The SAT? Your calculus final? If someone asked me this question back in elementary school, my answer would have been the impossible quiz. Released on February 20th, 2007, this perfectly crafted rage game quickly took over the internet after being front-paged on Newgrounds the next day. Glenn Rhodes, under his online alias Splat Me Do, took the concept of a goofy trivia game and turned it up to 11, subverting the player's expectations at almost every step. With no checkpoints present, the player must return to the very start after every failure, answering those earlier questions over and over again. Since the positions of the options aren't randomized, people could just mindlessly click the same answers hundreds of times without even reading the questions, hoping to progress just a bit further on the next attempt. Even if you knew every solution, many of the questions were mechanically challenging as well, involving minigames with mashing, math, and mouse movement. Unsurprisingly, the impossible quiz was quite conducive to speedrunning, with competition flaring up shortly after release. In the 18 years since, players have further transformed this simple game into an absolute spectacle, where questions fly by faster than any casual observer could hope to process them. However, before we analyze how this speedrun became so absurdly optimized, we first need to examine how this unique cornerstone of Flash came to be. Inspired by Earthworm Jim 2's quiz game show and the British comedy show Shooting Stars, Glenn began development on the Impossible Quiz back in late 2004 as part of a website that his friend was developing. On December 14, 2004, at the age of 18, Glenn published a demo of the Impossible Quiz on his DeviantArt page. The quiz had just 30 questions, and if you missed a single one, you had to start the whole thing over again. The trickery began with the very first question: how many holes in a polo? The British polo candy has one hole, but the correct answer to this question is 4. Which is the number of holes in the written phrase, a polo. Most questions involved puns, wordplays, niche trivia knowledge, or essentially random answers. But there were a few that required special actions beyond just selecting the correct option. For example, question 17 required you to move your mouse through a windy tunnel to a red button without touching the walls. However, this challenge can be bypassed in a few different ways. For one, you could right-click to open the context menu, preventing Flash from updating the cursor's position. Additionally, by holding Shift and pressing the Tab button, you could just select the red button and press Enter, an accessibility feature built into Flash Player. The next question was the first to feature one of Splap's original characters, Wurzel. Splap was known for creating crude, visceral artwork and comics, often featuring characters based on the Worms video game series. His art style was heavily inspired by the Ren and Stimpy show and the comic strip Calamity James. And for a tricky rage game that didn't take itself too seriously, it made for an almost perfect match. The end of the quiz indicated that there was more to come, and Splap continued to work on a beta version shortly after. Placing a checkpoint after question 30, he added 11 new questions that were quite creative and could be solved with relative ease. There were 2 question 37s for some reason, and the final question, 40, always resulted in a game over. However, Splap did not end up publishing this version of the game. His friend's website was never released, and development on the game halted. It may have stayed that way forever if it weren't for one thing. The demo just kept racking up views and downloads on DeviantArt, even years later. Splap realized that the formula had something special to it, and in late 2006, he began developing a new and improved version of the game from scratch. Some demo questions were carried over, but the vast majority of the content was completely new. Splap incorporated ideas from his friends and the general public, and the game eventually grew to 110 questions. There were many references to his newer art, memes, and pop culture. The randomness and creativity were off the charts, and aspects of Flash Player itself were incorporated in very unique ways. For example, Splap embraced the right-click bypass from question 17 in the demo, making it the solution to a similar question. Players were now afforded 3 lives, and 7 different skips could be collected to bypass some of the trickier questions. However, some questions couldn't be skipped, and failing any question with a time limit would result in an instant game over. Also, any tab tricks were off limits too. The full release hit the internet less than a month after it was announced, and the rest is history. The first video on the internet showcasing a full completion of the game was uploaded just a week after it was released. This 9-minute long recording would have marked the first world record, but there is a cut just before the game's final gauntlet, the so-called Epic 10. These questions all feature some sort of minigame with a time constraint, and it's easily the hardest section of the quiz. On March 11, 2007, Big Tip on a Bus uploaded a completion that clocked in at 6 minutes and 9 seconds. Big Tip had clearly played through the whole game a few times already, as he finished with all 3 lives and didn't really come close to failing any of the minigames. Every question was solved in its intended manner, though a few were completed faster than usual due to it being an experienced playthrough. On question 8, Big Tip navigates straight to the right option without revealing any of the incorrect choices first. On question 13, Big Tip double-clicks the top right option to instantly solve question 14, since both answers are in the same spot. On question 21, Big Tip clicks the correct option before the game reveals it, and on question 24, he clicks the V in lives without revealing the hint. Instead of solving question 44's puzzle, Big Tip just moves the first piece out of the way and clicks the N button. For question 47, he places his mouse right next to the red dot so he doesn't have to struggle navigating to it with an invisible cursor. This method is especially useful in question 103, where the N button isn't even visible until you hover over it. Big Tip already has the sequences from question 50 memorized, though he does struggle a bit when inputting the colors on question 56. It's also clear that he has fewer reps with the later questions, as he sometimes takes a second to remember and locate the answer. This is especially evident in question 92, where you have to select the audience members from the largest number to the smallest. He doesn't have the locations completely memorized, so he has to spend a lot of time scanning over the options to get the sequence right. Now, if you've never finished this game before, you may be wondering why Big Tip doesn't just use one of his 7 available skips to bypass this lengthy question. Well, let's take a look at 110, the game's most infamous question. Overall, Big Tip's completion was quite fast, evidenced by the next full playthrough uploaded to YouTube being almost 2 minutes slower. It took over 2 months for someone to beat Big Tip, with DNA Prodigy uploading a 5-minute 26-second run on May 12th. Judging from the title, this was performed as a genuine speedrun, and DNA made use of some tricks to save some time over Big Tip. On question 5, instead of navigating the mouse around the game window, DNA just right-clicks and goes straight to the end. He does the same thing on question 30, also right-clicking in question 56 to prevent the cursor from disappearing. DNA actually loses a bit of time in 82 from a misclick before being interrogated by the game. However, he does quite well with all of the mashing minigames, and it's pretty interesting to hear him explain why.
I did that one by walking the left mouse button. This is when you click alternating between your index and your middle finger. It's a term commonly used in paintball, which I've been playing since I was 8 or 9, so I'm relatively good at clicking fast.
Yep, DNA was butterfly clicking before it even had a name. His question 92 was quite a bit faster than Big Tip's, and on question 109, he started spamming the spider monkey while the transition frame was still up. Again, on the final question, he saved quite a bit of time by using all of the skips while the even lengthier cutscene was still on screen. Given how many portions of this game are of fixed length, a 44-second improvement was quite significant, and DNA wasn't finished. The next day, he improved to a 514, saving around 3 seconds by skipping question 104. You see, when the transition frame appears between each question in the Epic 10, it is still possible to interact with some of the elements on screen, even if they aren't visible anymore. Normally, when you click the square tomato, a next frame event starts the transition. Once the animation hits its 15th frame, next frame is called again to load question 104 underneath. However, if you press the tomato a second time before that 15th frame, you can trigger another next frame event, loading question 104 prematurely. Then, once the 15th frame of the transition hits, next frame is called again, thereby starting the next transition and skipping the question. Question 105 can also be skipped in a similar fashion, but since you need to play question 104 to do that, you can only skip one or the other. This trick doesn't work on the other Epic 10 questions because they either handle the next frame call with a non-repeatable event, or the final button is properly replaced with a dummy after the first press. Beyond the skip, DNA also improved his execution throughout most of the run, notably finishing question 71 before the buttons even had a chance to start cycling. He did lose some time at the start of 106 due to his cursor starting on the button, as the road sequence doesn't initiate until the mouse rolls over it. Regardless, 514 was a solid time, and DNA was fine leaving it there. However, he didn't upload the run to YouTube yet, as he didn't really see a reason to. There was no leaderboard to track runs of the game yet, and nobody else had beaten his 526. It wasn't until Rabid She-Wolf uploaded a 518 on June 29th that he finally posted it a few days later. Rabid was a bit disappointed to find out that they had not yet achieved the record, but they were still determined to reach the top of that podium. They had spent the past month grinding the game, and it all came together on July 5th, as Rabid posted a 508. Throughout the run, Rabid She-Wolf demonstrated slower mashing than DNA, but they made up for it by having generally better pointer speed and accuracy, most notably in question 101. Rabid had a decent lead going into question 103, but they didn't do the 104 skip, bringing them about even. With DNA only posting his 514 2 days prior, Rabid either didn't notice the skip in the run, or they hadn't watched the video at all. Thankfully, there was some time to save at the start of 106, and Rabid used the skips off-screen in question 110 much faster, yielding a final lead of 6 seconds. Rabid made the bold prediction that DNA had no chance of beating them now, and that turned out to be true. However, that doesn't mean they were totally invincible. On August 22nd, an aspiring record holder posted on a Facebook group for Impossible Quiz victors, sharing Rabid She-Wolf's run while claiming that his personal best was a 519. 2 more days is all it took for Radisprat to claim the record, as he shared a run that frame counted to a 501. Radisprat's main improvements over Rabid were the 104 skip and his mashing speed, though he was still slower than DNA's paintball walk. Radisprat was so fast on question 92 that he had to wait a second before clicking the lowest numbered audience member. You see, if you start the show before the countdown bomb appears, that happens. Already, the Impossible Quiz had been pushed remarkably close to what was likely its final minute barrier, barring any huge discoveries. The game was almost completely linear, and there just didn't appear to be that much more time left to save. Well, just 6 days later, the Impossible Quiz 2 was released. With 120 questions, lots of new mechanics, a visual overhaul, and even more references to Splap's previous work, this game was a perfect successor. And it's extremely impressive that he developed the whole thing in just 6 months. Unsurprisingly, the new release immediately took center stage, with full playthroughs appearing on YouTube just 2 days after release. Completions of the original game would still show up from time to time, but it was clear that the interest just wasn't as high as it used to be, and nobody was getting anywhere close to Radisprat's 501. There was still no leaderboard to keep track of runs, and as the years went by, the general popularity of the whole series continued to wane. Don't get me wrong, the games were still extremely well known, and Splat finished another installment in 2012 that further perfected the formula. But by 2013, the popularity of the series wasn't even close to the soaring heights it had achieved back in 2007. For there to be any hope of Radisprat's record falling, the game needed to be thrust back into the spotlight. Well, in December 2013, that second wind finally came.
How's it going, Brett? My name's The Impossible Quiz. It's a game that you bros have suggested about 5 million times. How many holes in a polo? There's 2. Use your skips.
In the early 2010s, the Let's Play genre on YouTube was at its peak popularity, where a creator would sit down and play through a game with a limited amount of editing, providing commentary along the way. While videos of the Impossible Quiz by notable figures had shown up on YouTube before, a full Let's Play series by the platform's most popular creator was a completely different ballgame. PewDiePie's videos of the Impossible Quiz series racked up tens of millions of views, and it wasn't long before Jacksepticeye, Markiplier, Smosh, and others followed suit. For the second time, the Impossible Quiz had fully taken over the internet, and with speedrunning also becoming more popular, it was about time for the two to combine once again. The sub 5 was inevitable. While Duck is now a well-known, top-level Banjo-Kazooie runner, the first speedrun that he ever uploaded to YouTube was this Impossible Quiz completion in 458.042, the first sub 5 on the leaderboard. Duck originally finished the Impossible Quiz shortly after its release, and 7 years later, he randomly picked it back up to kill time in a college class, completing it over and over again. He referenced a newer video on YouTube that demonstrated skipping question 105 instead of 104, which hadn't appeared yet in a world record. Given that Duck saved almost 3 seconds from it, it was clearly the better route. Duck also started the road sequence in question 106 while the transition was still fading out to save a bit of time. Overall, the execution in the run was not quite as good as Radisprat's. He saved significant time throughout the run due to having less lag, including around 4 seconds in question 85 and around 2 seconds in question 107. I guess computers got a decent bit faster between 2007 and 2014. Regardless, a sub 5 was a sub 5, and Duck was the first to do it, right?
Since posting this, my time has been beaten by HarisonTheClown.
HarisonTheClown was most likely the first person to achieve a sub 5 in the Impossible Quiz, with a 453 back in May of 2008. Radisprat again hailed it as the record in the comment section of a sped up run that he was calling out. And he would know better than anyone else at the time how to distinguish a real run from a fake. Unfortunately, Harrison's YouTube account was terminated for copyright infringement before the Impossible Quiz's second wind, and there's no footage of the run anywhere on the internet. It's honestly fortunate that the only snapshot of their channel on the Wayback Machine happens to include the thumbnail and title of the run. Regardless, Duck's run easily won the battle in terms of notability. It is the most viewed Impossible Quiz speedrun on YouTube, sitting at over 4.5 million views, and it has inspired many people to start speedrunning the game over the past decade. Even though Duck's 458 was likely not the first sub 5, it will forever be a cornerstone of Impossible Quiz speedrunning. Around 10 months after Duck's run, Confirmed CLM finally beat Harrison with a 450, but the video has also been lost to time. This run is on the leaderboard because the recording was still available in October of 2015, when the game's speedrun.com leaderboard was established, meaning that it could be verified by the moderators. However, this loss ultimately isn't that big of a deal, as the record was dramatically improved just a month later. On January 21st, 2015, Peon the Great pulled off the largest world record cut since DNA Prodigy's 526. Peon benefited from less lag compared to the 2007 runs, but their execution was also noticeably better. Notably, their question 108 was 2 seconds faster than any previous record. Peon also right-clicked in question 95 to place the mouse over the red dot without alerting the cat, allowing them to press it as soon as possible. However, the biggest improvement came in question 68, where Peon filled up the bar around 3 seconds faster than Radisprat and 4 seconds faster than Duck. Peon did have a better scrubbing technique, but a good chunk of time save came from using a higher pulling rate mouse. You see, the bar fills up by 1 tick every time that the mouse rolls over one of these invisible buttons on Chris the Cat. Back in 2007, almost all USB mice had a 125Hz pulling rate, which yields fairly choppy cursor movement, especially at high speeds. With how small each hitbox is, the pointer often skips over them in a single step, preventing the bar from advancing. With a sufficiently high polling rate, such as 1000Hz, this issue disappears, allowing the question to be completed a decent bit faster. By 2014, high polling rate mice were far more common, and Peon thankfully had one, though it was obviously not necessary for them to claim the world record. However, Peon wasn't done yet, and they kept at it for the next few weeks, continually improving their overall pointer speed and accuracy. They did abuse right-click in question 87 to decrease the difficulty while collecting the skips and shooting star as fast as possible. Perfectly using all of their skips at the end this time, Peon clocked in a 427.292, the game's first sub 430. Around a month after the game got its speedrun.com leaderboard, Ink Sadness Rain swooped in with a 426.167. They trailed slightly behind Peon for most of the run, but pulled ahead after a blazing fast 101. They lost the lead after a hiccup in 102, but they regained it due to their mashing edge in 109. Ink Sadness avoided the off-road hit detection in 106 by holding down left click. You see, the entire road is programmed as a button, and the game tries to ensure that the mouse is always hovering over it. However, if you hold down on a button in Flash Player and then move your cursor off of it, the button will stay in its hover state until you release left click. Since 106 is an auto-scroller, this obviously didn't save any time, but it did make a genuinely hard question completely free. For the next year and change, the leaderboard saw a decent bit of activity, but Ink Sadness's record stayed strong. In December 2016, a new runner named Solo Q started rising the ranks, and on the 11th, he claimed the record with a 424.500. There were no new time saves or strategies in the run, just an overall slightly cleaner performance. 15 days later, he cut that down to a 424.250, again without incorporating anything new. Despite being such a small improvement, it's pretty funny to see that his first 424 received less than 1,000 views on YouTube, while the second one received over 3.5 million. The algorithm for this website certainly works in some interesting ways. This was the first time that the record was improved by less than a second, and it showed that the game was likely approaching a brick wall. Solo Q believed that the limit was roughly a 421. And even that would require an insane mashing speed not yet demonstrated in a world record. The primary reason for this apparent limit is pretty obvious. The Impossible quiz has a whole lot of downtime. If you cut down solo queue's record to only include sections where inputs cannot make the game progress any faster, you get over 3 minutes of waiting. Indeed, only a third of the speedrun could still be optimized. While that does seem awfully bleak, it also indicates another reality. The theoretical limit was still a ways away. Back in September of 2008, someone uploaded a task of the game that retimes to a 319, which includes a decent amount of lag. For the parts of the speedrun that could be optimized, there was basically no speed limit. While the task involved inhuman mouse precision and mashing, there was clearly some room for RTA runners to grow. The impossible quiz has no RNG. Every answer, every button, every minigame, it's always the same. With dedicated practice and a competitive spirit, the sky was still the limit, even if it was hard for people to see at the time. Maybe, just maybe, a sub 4-minute run was possible. However, if that were true, it was certainly still a ways away. The next world record of 423.500 came on July 10th, 2017, as Gran 5364 found 2 minor optimizations to gain a slight edge. Instead of correctly starting with blue on question 56, Gran purposefully selects red to lose a life. There's a small bug where selecting an incorrect option at the start still advances the sequence. Therefore, Gran selects red again and carries on as usual, eliminating the first mouse movement from blue to red. Now, recall that right-clicking effectively freezes the cursor in place according to Flash Player. In question 102, Gran right-clicks where the first dot will appear, and then moves the cursor over to dot 2's position. Since the cursor is frozen, the first dot is immediately selected, and Gran left-clicks to update the cursor's position to dot 2. Again, both of these optimizations were tiny, but at this point, every millisecond mattered. After this world record, the game entered yet another period where plenty of new runners joined the fray, but nobody else could claim that first place spot. On October 10th, 2017, Gran took down the mobile version of the game as well, pulling off an arguably more impressive speedrun of 4 minutes and 4 seconds that is still the world record today. The mobile version has quite a few differences from the Flash game, so they are hard to compare. But Gran had clearly mastered both of them, the only person to ever do so. 2018 came and went with no new records, and the first 5 months of 2019 did too. On June 11th, 2019, Cygnus, a runner who had been climbing the ranks for the past 2 years, finally ended the drought. Cygnus had slightly worse pointer accuracy than Gran for most of the run, but they were a bit better at mashing and scrubbing, and that's all it took. 422.708. Cygnus also double-clicked the arrow at the end of 106 to load 107 early. The extra next frame call does not skip the question because its frame is duplicated for some reason. However, loading the options up to 15 frames early can save over half a second, as the options must be on screen for 80 frames before they can trigger the fake game over. Cygnus claimed that they would come back for a 420 if anyone else got the record, and for the rest of the year, nobody took them up on that offer. However, in early 2020, a runner named Business Pengu started rapidly climbing the ranks, and on January 30th, they prevented Cygnus from getting the first 420. Pengu had Gran's accuracy and Cygnus's mashing speed, but the scrubbing questions left a bit to be desired. They did implement a pretty risky strategy in 108 by clicking 4 and the spacebar while the transition was still fading out. Again, one wrong click would have ended the run. There were still a few questions left on the table, and a sub 420 was likely right around the corner. Cygnus had little motivation to return, and the prize was in Pengu's crosshairs. Well, March 8th, 2020 is the day that it came together. Pengu was even with their 420.333 going into 109, but faster mashing is all that it took to break the barrier. In the description, Pengu stated,
"Don't think I can go any faster."
The game's runners certainly felt like they were at a wall, as new record holders consistently checked out after just inching things forward. However, that may have been exactly what the game needed. If someone came along and generated a huge gap between first and second, it may have dashed future runners' hopes of ever claiming the record. However, since there was consistent separation throughout the leaderboard, the next spot was always within reach. If a new runner came along every few months and pushed the record down by a second or two before leaving, the game could still steadily progress towards its true limit. Pengu did come back 3 months later to set a lower 419, and that is where they left it. The next runner to step up to the plate was Krimic, who had notably better accuracy than Pengu, but lost a couple seconds on the scrubbing questions, likely due to having a low pulling rate mouse. Despite that obstacle, he set a 418.167, and he predicted that the game's limit was a 415. At this point, runners started paying attention to what their timer read entering question 34, since it's the first one with significant downtime. Krimic got there in 11.5 seconds, but had gotten lower 11-second splits in the past. Krimic claimed to get 12 clicks per second when mashing, but at this point, there were probably some Minecraft Bed Wars players out there who could get up to 20. Krimic noted that it was possible to start spelling Chihuahua while the transition was still fading out, which had yet to be attempted in a world record due to the significant difficulty and risk associated with it. Krimic also noted that it was possible to click more numbers in 108 during the fade out beyond just the 4. Finally, by keeping the cursor at a lower point when mashing in 109, it would be possible to hit the next arrow faster. To be honest, all of that put together sounds like a bit more than 2.2 seconds of time save, but I guess time will tell. That same day, he set a 417.208 with a better 109, but without the optimizations in 101 and 108. The day after that, he set a 417.167 that was nearly identical. However, unlike previous record holders, these improvements weren't just done for self-satisfaction. Krimic was actively trying to defend his record from another top-level runner that was right on his tail. That player was Piano Dude 1011, and that very same day,
I think I did it!
he closed the gap with a 417.083. He had a significant edge from faster scrubbing, but slower mashing and a few accuracy hiccups made the runs very close. However, the writing was pretty much on the wall. Unless Krimic could get better at scrubbing, Piano was going to permanently pull ahead. However, that didn't mean that the record was currently out of reach. The next day, Krimic entered question 68 a second ahead and left almost 2 seconds behind. His 108 was pretty good, but his 101 was sloppy, and he missed the early start in 106. There was still a 2-second deficit heading into question 108. With a masterful final 3, Krimic pulled off a 416.917 despite losing 3 seconds on a single question. Surprisingly, Piano did not return the favor, and the record stood into October. On October 19th, Krimic had a run that was tied with his record going into the Epic 10. He lost a life in 101, and then balled out for the remainder of the question. He didn't miss the early start in 106, and every other Epic 10 question was clean, 415.500. Krimic achieved the best possible time he had theorized, and he knew that a 414 was on the menu. However, question 68 was holding him back, and he still had no idea why. With a better mouse, his ceiling would have been higher, but as it stood, Piano was the player primed to get this game past the next 10-second barrier, sub 410. And throughout November 2020, that's exactly what he did. Piano was truly the first Impossible Quiz player to master every discipline that the game had to offer. Speed, accuracy, mashing, and scrubbing. Everything was optimized. Piano scored the fastest 102 completion ever in a run, aided by a new strategy of moving straight to the final dot by holding left click to negate contact. Despite there being no major milestone in sight and no other runners on his tail, Piano just kept going. He knew he could get a 408. Well, on November 23rd, he was on pace for a 407.
Wait.
Piano missed one skip, and it cost him over a second and a half. It was still a world record, but it didn't really feel like one. Piano needed that 407, and he kept pushing for it. Still, he knew that his world record was safe from danger for the time being. There was a 6-second gap between first and second, and a 3.5-second gap between second and third. Additionally, every person in the top 7 was an inactive current or former world record holder, except for one, Mini Danger 13, who had a personal best of 420. He had steadily improved throughout 2020 and was still actively playing the game. However, 11 seconds off record was still a pretty seismic gap, and it would take a considerable amount of effort to bridge it anytime soon. So, Mini Danger put in the work. Mini Danger just barely bested Piano on January 25th, 2021, cementing 409 as the first and only second barrier to have 3 world records. It was unfortunate that Piano couldn't put together a 407 before someone caught up to him, but losing the record may have been exactly what he needed, as he finally pulled it off the next day. 4.5 years later, 407.875 is still Piano's personal best. The torch had officially passed once again. Mini Danger ended up claiming a 406 in the weeks that followed, but he unfortunately forgot to record it. Thankfully, he got one on tape soon after, an official record of 406.792. Then, the top of the leaderboard went dormant once again. There were only 2 changes in the top 10 in the 5 months that followed Mini Danger's 406. First, Krimic improved his personal best to a 413, though he wasn't planning to go for the record. In July, a new runner named NT claimed 4th place, but he also had no intentions of claiming the world record. Thus, Mini Danger just came back and did it himself. 405.042. Back in November 2020, Mini Danger and Piano had theorized what it would take to push the Impossible Quiz below the elusive 4-minute barrier. By January, both Mini Danger and Piano had a sum of best segments of 405, and Piano boldly stated that someone would need to complete the mashing questions with 9 seconds left on the clock to make it feasible. Well, Mini Danger's mashing wasn't superhuman yet, so 405 was still the time to beat. However, almost 6 months later, Mini Danger's record was still standing, and there were no shakeups in the top 10. Finally, on January 16th, 2022, Jagame scored 3rd place with a 410 as his first submitted run. His pointer accuracy and speed were slower than Mini Danger's, but he did have one unique edge: an 8 remaining on the countdown in question 88. That had never been seen before. Jagame was ridiculously fast at butterfly clicking, and if he put in enough practice with the rest of the game, that world record could easily be his. Well, it didn't take him long.
Oh my god!
With a multi-second mashing edge over Mini Danger and every other impossible quiz runner, this game was Jagame's oyster, and the world record still had room to fall. Jagame's sum of best was a sub 4, and he had a clear path to get there. Clean up question 82, stay consistent at mashing, and take larger risks in the Epic 10. Jagame went full steam ahead. Choking right at the end was not unheard of, given the execution needed while managing massive nerves, but Jagame losing this 4 flat to it was easily the worst choke in the game's history. Thankfully, just a few days later,
Yes! Oh my god, finally! I'm so happy. I've spent so long trying to get a better world record. Oh my god. I took my time here on purpose because I choked so many times there. I'm so happy.
Jagame got his redemption, taking the ending slow to ensure that the run wouldn't fall apart again. However, for sub 4, there was almost no wiggle room. Jagame had to ball out the whole run, even through that final gauntlet of 108 through 110. On March 2nd, he had his first opportunity. Jagame kept misclicking one of the skips, and a run on 358 pace finished as a 4 flat. He had a bit of breathing room here thanks to a fantastic mid-game, but a freak accident on the last question wiped it all away. He couldn't let it happen again. Well, this time, Jagame learned something new. If you click a skip, move your mouse to the next skip, and then click that one as well, all within the same frame, both skips will be consumed, but only one will be applied. It's insane that this happened to Jagame not once, but twice, right at the end of a sub 4 pace. Thankfully, he didn't let it deter him.
Oh my god! Yes! Oh my god! I did it.
On March 3rd, 2022, the Impossible Quiz's final minute barrier fell in dramatic fashion. Sure, Jagame's mashing gave him an immediate edge, but at this point, his speed and execution had easily eclipsed Mini Danger as well. Now 5 seconds ahead, Jagame indicated that his journey was over, and the ball was in Mini Danger's court. However, after Mini Danger improved to a 401, Jagame decided to rebuild the buffer with a 357.667. Without getting better at mashing, Mini Danger just couldn't compete, and he needed to be more aggressive in the Epic 10 as well. So, for the next few months, he locked in. After several failures near the end, he finally got his first sub 4 on September 25th. And just 10 days later,
It's back. Mini Danger is back on top.
Mini Danger was back on top. Jagame quickly went back to attempts, and on October 24th, he had a run that was tied with his personal best going into the Epic 10.
Yes! Wait! Oh no! Oh fuck! Oh god! Oh god! Oh my god! Oh my god! I don't know which world record, I don't know!
An initial retime indicated that Jagame missed the world record by a single frame. But while researching for this video, I retimed every world record with a 24 FPS frame count to properly match the game's frame rate. Jagame's personal best was retimed as well, and that's when we found out that it was actually a former tied world record. Regardless, Jagame wanted an untied record, and just 3 days later, he got his wish.
Yes! Oh my god! I've done it. It's fucking back. Let's go. And it's a new second barrier, which I honestly did not expect.
His overall gameplay was still getting better, and his elephant split was almost a sub 9. However, he had considerable time loss in 102 and 110. 354 seemed to be the game's new limit, and Jagame was essentially just 2 questions away from it. However, the rest of 2022 came and went with no new records. With Jagame going inactive, Mini Danger had another opportunity to catch back up, and on January 20th, 2023, he got his own 356. Jagame still didn't respond, so Mini Danger kept going, scoring the first 355 on June 9th. Mini Danger had lost over a second in 91, a question that had been stumping speedrunners for quite a while. It felt pretty random whether the game would give a slow or fast rip, and it didn't really seem like there was a way to control it. Again, on August 5th, Mini Danger got a world record that would have been a 354 if it weren't for that pesky question. Thankfully, the next day, Mini Danger got a run with a clean rip, and the other stars aligned as well.
Yes! It's better than what I thought it would be.
354 was Mini Danger's goal, and he was content leaving it there for the time being. This time seemed to be the game's limit a year ago, but judging from Mini Danger's sum of best, there was still slightly more room to improve. However, he wasn't yet interested in taking things further. Back in July, a runner named BenBenQ99 became the 3rd person to achieve a sub 4 in the Impossible quiz. Ben had actually been running the game since 2018, earlier than the 5 previous world record holders: Jagame, Mini Danger, Piano, Krimic, and Business Pengu. Ben had never held the world record himself, usually hovering around 10th place. However, in 2022, Ben achieved the world record in the Impossible Quiz too, and he swept every world record for the Impossible Quiz book. In 2023, he started running the first game more seriously, getting especially good at scrubbing and mashing. He set a 358, a 357, and a 356, all within 2 weeks. With a sum of best of 352, he was easily in striking distance of the world record, and all he needed was one really good run. However, there was one technique that could make things a bit easier.
Oh my god, world record. BenBenQ99 finally breaks the world record. I've actually never gotten world record in this game. The first run I ever played was in 2018. It took 5 years. GG, dude.
With drag clicking at his disposal, BenBenQ got his first world record, breaking another second barrier in the process. For the people who aren't chronically online, drag clicking is a mashing technique that involves using friction and vibration to generate tons of clicks by dragging your finger across the button instead of moving it up and down. This technique does require skill, but it is very surface and hardware dependent, which does make it pretty controversial. Drag clicking gave Ben a 4 to 5 second edge, and that's largely what made it possible for him to get the world record with 2 seconds lost on the elephant split alone. With the technique, a sub 350 was not out of the question for Mini Danger. However, for now, he just wanted the world record back, and he didn't have time to nail down drag clicking.
Yes!
353.625 was the record he got just 2 days later. The run could have been a 352, but he had a couple of slight hiccups in 108. Meanwhile, Ben kept honing in his accuracy, and while he still had not reached Mini Danger's level, drag clicking enabled him to break another second barrier.
Yes! Let's go, dude! Finally, 352. Let's freaking go. Almost 351. But I think, honestly, this is probably going to be my last run for this game, because honestly, Mini Danger, he's about to beat this record and absolutely tear it down with his new mouse, the bloody A70. But finally, I have a time that I'm actually pretty satisfied. This is unreal. Thank you for watching, and this is probably not going to last very long, but this is the last time that I'm going to probably hold the world record. See you.
Ben was content with his time, and his historic climb had come to a triumphant end. He knew that Mini Danger would permanently overtake him once he figured out drag clicking with his new mouse. And that very same day, he appeared to do just that by a single frame. His drag clicking wasn't very good yet, but it was enough to just barely scrape by. However, after the accurate retimes performed for this video, Ben's run came out to a 352.250, and Mini Danger's came out to 352.292. It wasn't a world record. Therefore, Ben continued to hold first place for another 5 months. In early 2024, Mini Danger came back to go for the next second barrier. However, after setting 6 more 352s, he still did not have the world record. Mini Danger could not get drag clicking to work consistently, proving that it wasn't just a free cheat code to save a few seconds. Instead, Mini Danger switched to a double butterfly technique where he could generate 2 clicks from each press by hitting the button in a certain way. He finally broke the drought with a 351.5 on February 17th, 2024, and he boldly stated that he wouldn't stop until he got the sub 350. He was on pace for it in the Epic 10 the next day. He just barely had his mouse in the wrong place at the start of 106, and it cost him a third of a second. It was going to be close.
What? There's no way. There's no way.
That tiny slip-up cost him dearly, though the pressure it relieved likely enabled him to complete the final gauntlet as fast as he did. Sub 350 was so tantalizingly close, and it was poised to happen any day now. However, 3 months and thousands of attempts later, he had not had any luck. Mini Danger was struggling with the main choke points in the run, namely 56, 102, and 108. In particular, question 56 seemed to just randomly bug out sometimes, similar to 91. Eventually, Mini Danger realized that slowing down the second click on the red dot made it dramatically more consistent, and at this point, he had enough wiggle room in his sum of best to justify it. Well, on May 23rd, 2024, he was again tied with his personal best going into the Epic 10.
Yeah! There's the sub 350! There's the sub 350! That's the
Mini Danger had finally done it, capping off this legendary performance with 2 golds through the final gauntlet. This was very likely the last 10-second barrier that the game would ever see, as even with drag clicking, a mid 340 was about as far as you could go. In terms of notable barriers, the game had finally reached its limit. Mini Danger was done for now, but two important discoveries did happen in his time away. First of all, by opening Flash Player's settings menu at the start of 56, it was possible to get the cursor to show the entire time without needing to right-click, making the question both easier and faster. This exploit was known all the way back in 2007, but it had largely been forgotten about until now. Also, in 91, it was found that ripping the paper with a zigzag motion was much more consistent, as the hitboxes are all much longer horizontally than they are vertically. Mini Danger came back in February of 2025, and he combined these strategies with better double butterfly clicking to save over a second in the first 91 questions. He wasn't quite as fast with the ending gauntlet, but he still scored the first 348. Mini Danger kept getting better at the first 91, and on February 26, 2025, he pulled off a 348.208. He knew that a 347 was clearly in his wheelhouse, but that is still where the record stands today. Though Mini Danger still holds a commanding lead, Jagame has recently improved his personal best to a 351.417. A better question 91 could have made it a sub 350, and he still has time to save in the mashing questions. Jagame has what it takes to reclaim the record, and it will be exciting to see if he's able to pull it off. Additionally, there is a known strategy that could save a second if performed flawlessly, and it isn't a new one. Skipping 104 instead of 105 can be faster if banana is input quickly enough. This is quite risky to go for with minimal payoff, but it will likely make it into a world record at some point. Indeed, those 2007 runners may have been right all along. Nearly 2 decades after its release, the Impossible Quiz endures as a cultural staple of the Flash era. The game has recently enjoyed a third wind of popularity, sparked by Tamago's fantastic narrative-style videos of him completing the whole series on his own. The Impossible Quiz continues to go viral on YouTube, and it is now the most played game in the history of addicting games, with over 88 million visits on that site alone. It's also undeniable that speedruns are a huge part of the game's legacy. The Impossible Quiz perfectly embodies the speedrunning adage that the limits are rarely where you think they are. With 51 world records set by 17 different runners, this iconic masterpiece just keeps getting faster, currently by just fractions of a second at a time. Indeed, after over 18 years of pretty consistent competition, the asymptote has never been closer. Early Impossible Quiz speedruns mainly focused on avoiding mistakes while optimizing some of the longer questions, but now every single aspect of the run has been pushed as close to perfection as humanly possible. Without another major discovery, a sub 340 is likely out of the question, but it is theoretically possible. There's now a TAS of the game that clocks in at 3 minutes and 6 seconds. Regardless, it's pretty remarkable that humans have brought the world record for this entirely mouse-driven game within 45 seconds of absolute perfection. The Impossible Quiz may not have a built-in scoring system like its sequel does, but I imagine that's good enough for an A+. Thanks for watching.